They went into their summit bitterly divided on several big issues, major issues, but NATO leaders have managed to unite, it would appear, behind common commitments. The talks in Watford, just north of London, finished not long ago. They said Russia's, quote, aggressive actions posed a threat, while China's growing influence presented more challenges and opportunities. They also settled a major stumbling block when Turkey dropped its objection to NATO's Baltic defence plan, and they asked the NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg to start a reflection process on the future of the alliance.
What we proved today is that NATO delivers on substance. We continue to adapt and respond. We have just implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defense in a generation. And you know, I've been a politician for many years, and politicians, they are very often criticized for being very good on rhetoric and then bad on substance. In NATO, in one way, it's the opposite. The rhetoric is not always excellent, but substance is perfect.
Live now to that summit venue and our diplomatic editor, James Bayes. So, James, your headline on what they've been talking about.
Well, they went into this summit with clear, open differences. Those differences, I think, are still there. I don't think there's been any resolution of the major problems here. What they managed to find, or what the NATO Secretary-General's managed to find, is some language to paper over the cracks. Perhaps they made some progress with regard to Turkey, because President Erdogan was trying to stop the plans to protect or further protect Poland and the Baltic states, because he was unhappy with the rest of the NATO allies and their view of his incursion into northern Syria. That maybe is one small bit of a resolution to this, but the other issues that have bedeviled these NATO allies on this, what is supposed to be their 70th birthday party, have not really been solved. Instead, I think a focus on new threats, areas where there weren't disagreement, for example, the rise of China and its telecommunications systems, which they say they're only going to use secure telecommunications going forward. NATO focusing not just on air, land and sea and cyber, but now also on space, and also a focus on artificial intelligence, areas where they can find agreement, but there is still, at this time of an anniversary for NATO, much more open disagreement that you've seen at many other times in 70 years of this alliance.
James, we're just seeing one report as well saying the US President Donald Trump may cancel his final NATO conference. Is he okay?
This is a big question, and I think we might, we're looking at the reports very closely here, because we haven't had official word from the White House, but we may see President Trump leave early, and it looks like he is upset. Let me explain the background to this. As you know, the NATO leaders were all entertained at a reception by the Queen in Buckingham Palace. Well, during that reception, there was a camera shot of some of the leaders talking, and Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, chatting with President Macron and the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, and Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter. And you can make out some of the words that were said there, and it is clear that Justin Trudeau was joking about President Trump and his impromptu press conferences. Well, it appears that President Trump didn't hear about that, although the video has been floating around on social media for quite a few hours, until very recently, when he was with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He was asked about this video, and he seems to have been very upset about it. In fact, he told reporters that the Canadian Prime Minister was two-faced, the sort of language before President Trump came on the scene at NATO that you'd never have seen in diplomatic circles like this. And apparently President Trump has now said that he may well cancel everything, cancel his news conference that was going to take place in about an hour and a half's time, and head straight back to Washington, D.C. We're trying to get clarification from the White House of his plans. But of course, if that is the case, you may well see the end of this summit overshadowed by what looks to be a tantrum from the US president.
I think the video we're referring to, James, it was running around on Twitter first thing this morning. It's Justin Trudeau drinking a beer. Emmanuel Macron, I think, is having a glass of red wine. But the US president leaving a big summit early and then, let's be plain, we're all grown-ups, slagging off the Canadian Prime Minister when he's safely ensconced back on Air Force One. He's got form on this. He's done it before.
He's done it before. He's done it at one of the G7 gatherings. Exactly the same thing happened. But it's worth noting that you've got so many differences going on between NATO leaders. You'd already had the spat between President Macron and President Trump. You have problems between President Macron and Chancellor Merkel. You have problems with President Erdogan and many of the other leaders. Although this is a relationship we know is a tricky relationship between the Canadian Prime Minister and the US President, the fact that this comes into the open as well really is pretty shocking and showing the personal problems between these leaders as well as the policy differences between them. President Trump says things like no other US president has ever said, but what is interesting is the other leaders are not just smiling and taking it anymore. You saw with President Macron when he sat next to President Trump quite combative responses from these leaders when President Trump takes them on now, and it's leading to a level of public discourse you don't normally see among world leaders.
Perhaps worth restating as well, James, this is just a rumour and speculation that's doing the rounds there in London. We have not had this confirmed either by the White House or by the White House people who are there at the summit venue. But sorry, James, carry on.
Well, Peter, we're hearing it from some of the pool reporters who are the ones who are around the president. So, although we don't have an official word from the White House, my understanding from some of the people that I'm seeing this from suggests that it might well be more than the rumour.
OK, James, thank you so much for that clarity. We'll talk to you later, I'm sure. Well, here's a little clip of what some of the US president, what he had to say, comments about Turkey and the Turkish president, Mr. Erdogan. He says Turkey is doing a good job as a NATO member.
The border and the safe zone is working out very well. And I give a lot of credit to Turkey for that. The ceasefire is holding very much so, and I think people are surprised. And maybe someday they'll give me credit, but probably not. But it worked out well. They've been trying to do this for 100 years. That border is a mess for a long time. We pulled our soldiers out. We took over the oil. We have soldiers where the oil is. And that's the way I like it. And they can police their own border, and that's what they're doing. They can use other countries if they want.
OK, let's bring in Marwan Bishara again. He's Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. Marwan, if Donald Trump's about to do a runner, will that overshadow the good work that they've done at NATO?
Well, I'm not sure about the good work, but certainly it might, because I think that's also was his goal, it seems, from the beginning. You know, he comes in usually to these summits and his eyes are at home rather than, at the globe. And he is in a tough position now. The impeachment in the judiciary in Congress started. And he's trying to excuse certain confidence, if you will, from the beginning, firing shots right, left, and center, including at the French president. But certainly, as we've heard, the comeback by certain Europeans, of course, has left him disarmed a bit. And now, with the video coming out, look, I mean, he's been selling this thing for the last 2 or 3 years now that America is more respected now around the world. But the ridicule against the American president, and not the first time and not the second time, really makes it clear that America may be respected, but certainly the American presidency is less respected, more ridiculed around, and that does not bode well for him. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if he leaves with a certain fit against his partners. You would have expected the leader of the world superpower in these very exceptional times with the rising power of China and Russia and sensitive times for global security for him to stick around and to really tell the world where America stands on these issues and not be concerned with the little, chat of some leaders, having a drink. But it is Trump after all.
He's also having to react to what Jens Stoltenberg was saying, which is we're going to go down this road of having a, quote, reflection process. A reflection process, by definition, means at the end of your reflecting, you might change who you are. But how can it change? And where's it? I mean, it's already going to have $400 billion more than it's got at the moment in the next, what, 4 or 5 years?
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt that NATO does need a reflection once again, and it needs even more than that, because it does need a reshaping of its mission, a reshaping of its structure, of its objectives, and yes, of its combined forces. Because the threat of the Cold War is no longer what it was. The Cold War is over, the Soviet Union is no more, neither is the Warsaw Pact. There's a host of international challenges, whether it is China and Russia, whether it is cyber and space, and certainly terrorism and the like. And that requires a certain remodeling and reshaping, and of course then the reflection is really important. And look, I mean, you know, we talk a lot about the micro issues and what's going on in the summit today and yesterday, but the issues facing the world, Peter, are incredibly important. In as far as you know, as a student of history, it reminds me of the times after the 1929 crisis and before the Second World War. Because what was the Second World War all about? It was about a European power trying to be a global power, at the time Germany. Now it's China trying to be an Asian power, to be a global power. And NATO is trying to grapple with this fact that China is meant through arms, economy, and everything else to be a global power. Hence, NATO has to have an answer. What is that answer? Is it disarmament? Is it dialogue? Is it non-proliferation treaties with China? Or is it military buildup, 400 billion more, and all sorts of projections of forces and so on and so forth? What worries me as a non-European, non-Chinese, non-Russian, what worries the world is, one, not the superpowers to go through another arms race towards another global war. But before that, and that's what usually happens, and that's what happened during the Cold War. Let's all remember that the Cold War was undone without a single shot being fired. But in the process, for 4 decades, we in the rest of the world suffered from proxy wars. So what worries me now is as China and Russia and the West builds up, that it's the rest of us that's going to be at the receiving end of their power as they try to maneuver and expand their areas of influence. So what we heard from NATO today is not $400 billion to settle refugees and to invest in the immediate periphery of Europe and the West in order to create new prosperities, to cut on the refugees and to create stability. That's not what we hear. What we hear is more arms buildup as President Trump demanded of everyone to have at least 2% of their GDP going to defense. And that is not clear how that will create a more safe global security environment.
Marwan, many thanks.